Yes?
Yep.
Okay, welcome to the 7th Annual Clean Drinking Water Conference. We take a holistic view when we think about clean drinking water, from the oceans to the skies, to the reservoirs, to the sewage treatment plants, and back through the water cycle again. We've got Dean Wright here, who heads up the College of Engineering at the university. Is going to give a few brief remarks.
It's like wearing two hats because I'm also a water person. And I have to admit that back when I was in college and I was a senior in college, my senior design project was a brand new faculty member that was at the university I was at. And it was his first spring. And I asked for a project, and he said that you can do stormwater. And he had me go out on the side of the hill. The university is on a hill. And I would stand and basically, when it rained, I would sit there and take samples and then take them back to the lab and do analyses. And what the irony was is that 30 years later, I'm still doing the same thing. The stormwater collection got into my blood, and when I finally went through graduate school and had a couple of years of a job, and then got into research here, it got into stormwater, and did it ever since. So it's unfortunate that the USGS speaker's not here to talk about Scituate Reservoir. Are you the USGS
Yes,
speaker?
I am, yes.
I was going to say that back in the days of, I think it's in the late 80s, early 90s, research project that I had, they allowed me to go onto the reservoir, of course, with somebody from the Scituate Water Resources, the Province Water Resources Board. There were people that would normally go on there, and they allowed us to put 7 buoys in the reservoir. And we monitored water quality in the reservoir for the better part of a year. And I always tell a really quick story that I'm standing, we're actually in the boat, there's about 5 of us in the boat, and it's a very hot day, it must be 100 degrees. And there is some form of Scituate God that sits up there, because I can remember making a comment to somebody that was in the boat, I sure wish we had a cold beer. And this is the honest truth. Within a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, bobbing alongside the boat was a beer. And so, of course, it wasn't as cold as you'd want. Too bad it wasn't down at 90 feet. It would have been a lot colder. But I always feel Patuxent River was my first river that I ever worked on. And I spent a great deal of time up there. I think I walked every single foot of the Patuxent River at one time or another. Spent a lot of time in Scituate watershed. So this type of conference is really important. I think that we've come a long way within the state with what we've had to do. We've got a long way to go still. And I know that people like the faculty that are here that are working in this area are doing a great job in moving it forward. And the speakers today sounded great. So I welcome you here, and hope it's a great afternoon. Thank you.
This is the program. This is Dr. Thiem over here, if you haven't met him. I'm Dr. Nickel. And I just want to call your attention to this. I do have some programs up here for people that get really interested in this subject. The first speaker has worked on a strategic plan for the state of Rhode Island, and you can find it on the web. There's the website for the strategic plan. This is a new strategic plan, and I'm sure he's going to talk about it. Let me bring up his PowerPoint presentation, and we can get started here. Mr. Kenneth Burke. He's an alumni of the College of Engineering, and he heads up the Rhode Island Water Resources Board.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nichols, Dr. Thiem. You saw Trustee Addison here somewhere. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk. Yes, we did do a strategic plan recently. I've been with the Water Resources Board for coming on 4 years now, and this was not something that I thought that was actually required of me. The Water Resources Board has been in existence for over 50 years, but I learned fairly quickly that it was actually very essential, and not only am I an alum of the Civil Engineering College, but I'm also a recent graduate of the business school. I got my MBA at MIT a few years ago. So I've been drinking the business school Kool-Aid pretty heavily, and I directly employed this strategic planning knowledge. So what we're going to talk about today is essentially who the Water Resource Board is. We'll do that really quickly. We'll recap some of the projects we've worked on, and certainly with USGS we've done a lot of work over several decades, and then what we're up to now. Simply what is a result of the strategic planning process we went through. So, sticking with our mission, again, we have multiple facets to our program. One of them is the long and short range strategic planning of the state of Rhode Island for water resources. It's really unique in that we're one of only a few agencies that has that full responsibility to do long range and short range strategic planning. Most of the other agencies have the Division of Planning do their own strategic planning for them. That's not true for the Water Resources Board. And this is a screenshot of one of our board meetings where we actually went to the Bristol County Water Authority. We essentially, on a monthly basis, took our show on the road, and we hosted meetings in a variety of places. We actually had a meeting in a barn at Rich Sharner's place up on Route 2. We were right around the corner at the Kingston Free Library in December a couple of years ago. Save the Bay on multiple occasions, Quonset Development Corporation. So we really try to reach out very extensively to make sure we get good stakeholder involvement in our programs. We also develop water supplies. This one in particular, it's tough to see here, but again, as Dr. Neckel pointed out, this is on our website. This is a water source we just completed in the town of New Shoreham. They've been working for about 15 years to acquire this site, but we had actually had much better success. I'm not sure why, but we stepped in and helped out about $1 million acquisition, including easements from the Nature Conservancy. And just last month, we finalized paperwork to allow the town to go use that site for a 20-year lease for $1. So again, it's a community-type program. We give back to water suppliers. This is some current work we're doing out in Charlestown. My mom would kill me. I'm out in the field with my suit, but that's just the way things work sometimes. And it's tough to see here, but this is Dr. Froelich, a professor here at URI. We actually brought him out in the field. He's done some extensive research as far as contaminant tracking in groundwater, specifically in this part of the world. So we actually stopped by and picked them up and took them out in the field for the better part of the day. And this is another source that we're working at putting online. This is the Big River Management Area. It's in the central part of the state, 8,400 acres purchased for a reservoir in the 60s and 70s. Done extensive work with the USGS in this area, actually tying back to the University of Rhode Island, where we have some of the environmental folks at URI that have helped out in assessing wetlands, wetland characteristics, transmissivity of water flow between wetlands at the upper layers of the earth strata, and then down below where we're trying to get water out of the ground. And I put this part over here. This is our good friends at the Kent County Water Authority. At the same time, we're working on developing this water source, and this is just the way Rhode Island is. Kent County Water Authority went out and developed their own well at their own expense, at a significantly higher expense than what we were proposing to do, only a couple of miles away. I attended their groundbreaking ceremony. I was one of the only ones there, but even if they go contrary to what we're trying to do with the Water Resource Board, we still support water suppliers in general terms. So again, we develop water supplies. We also have a current requirement to assure efficient use of water, the sustainable use of water. This is a statute that was passed just a few years ago. We promulgated a rule to put it into effect, and we had some extensive work with Rhode Island Water Works Association and Clean Water Action and a large coalition of folks interested in water supply. We're actually collecting that information now from all the water supplies throughout the state. And then we have this broad mission of the proper use, development, conservation, and protection of water resources. And I love this statutory requirement because they give you no instructions as to how to do it. It's quite a bit. It seems like it could be that we have some competing obligations, but it makes the job very interesting, to say the least. So part of that statutory requirement requires the definition or the ability to calculate the safe yield of our water resources, declaring areas of the state that are exceeding or threatening to exceed their safe yield, and then developing water availability estimates so we can actually work with municipalities and other political entities so that we have a well-rounded water resource program so that we're not overusing any of the specific water resources of the state. So prior to my arrival, I actually came in 2009, but the Water Resources Board's strategic plan had been a very functional program. Basically, it was a business plan. Every 2 years, they'd recycle a lot of functional projects that they'd be doing. The top priority when I came in was to produce groundwater out of the Big River management area. And I did not ask any questions. The first day in the door, I was told that was my top priority. I said, yes, sir, I appreciate the opportunity for a job, and I will do that job to the best of my ability. Very interesting project. We also had other projects going on, emergency interconnections between water suppliers. Part of our mission is to make sure there's redundancy in our water supply community, and we assist them through a cost-sharing program. But that Big River project, it was a very interesting project. Again, defined explicitly in our strategic plan. Took it head on with the help of our consultants at Weston Sampson. And what we had learned is essentially that none of the water suppliers in proximity to this area wanted to buy the water. They felt that it was not a good use of 8,400 acres of pristine water supply land that was expressly condemned for surface water, for a future reservoir. They also felt, as we've done, we've completed a very extensive pro forma, that the cost of the water just wasn't competitive. They were producing their own clean potable water at a very reasonable cost, and Kent County buys water wholesale from Providence Water. Still, we couldn't touch that cost. And as you heard Dean Wright earlier, I mean, Providence Water's got a great system. They've got a lot of protected land. It's the #2 ranking potable water source or finished water source in the country. So we couldn't touch it. There was no compelling reason for these water suppliers to actually buy the groundwater that we might produce in Big River, which is another way of saying there's no regulation. There's no hammer. Okay, we got the carrot, we've got no stick. And there was concerns that DEM are doing some great work in identifying mechanisms to gauge the amount of flow that should be left in rivers and streams, but it's kind of variable. They've had a program that's been drafted for about 4 years. They haven't actually put it into a final form yet. So it's concerned that there would be future restrictions on groundwater withdrawals. So after I'd gone through several years of work on this program of developing Big River as a groundwater source, learned that nobody really wanted it. It's very, very odd, except my board. Go figure. So, the lessons learned as I kind of stepped through that and understanding that strategic plan that was in place previously, again, we've got some environmental constraints that haven't been significantly articulated. They've been underestimated as far as the impact for the water supply community. Infrastructure constraints, where you are in proximity to clean water is very important. And when you actually start crunching numbers, it's great to have a pristine water source, but if you're just too far away, it becomes financially unviable at some point. And then future demand projections. This was something that was on the back end of our conversations as to what to do with this program. That was in question as well. There's a need to have a stronger tie to our communities where community planners actually have a better idea of what's happening with land use and future demand projections. Water suppliers understand it functionally. They know how much water they have to produce. They know when it peaks. They really don't have the the better idea of at what pace development is going to happen, should happen, and should happen in a sustainable manner. So, after we concluded this Big River Well project, which again is a catalyst for me to transition from the older strategic plan that the board had to our new program, we went back, we being the staff and myself, we just reviewed the statutes just to make sure that we understood what we're trying to do at our program, what the state expects of us, and actually how the various agencies of the state knit together to have a well-rounded program for water resource management. And we decided to ask 3 basic questions of our board, which we prepared the information for them. How much water is there? How much are we using? And how much are we going to need in the future? So we answered those questions through a series of 3 workshops, 3 public workshops. In May, and I have a separate PowerPoint presentation, I can make that available to you, but with the use of USGS reports that we've compiled over the course of 10 years, these water use and availability studies, it was a very, very detailed, very elaborate, and very scientific aggregation of statistical information as far as water that flows through the state, actually basin by basin, and counting for consumptive uses, evapotranspiration, out-of-basin transfers. There's a lot of data out there. Great, great science from USGS, but very difficult to interpret. So what we did is we basically interpreted it. We aggregated it, we put it together, and through the state, if you can kind of conceive this at a very high level, there's approximately 1 trillion gallons of water a year that flows through the state. It's not necessarily in one particular point or another, or there when you need it, or at the sufficient quality. But this is just an aggregation of information we're able to draw from those USGS studies. And then the amount of water we're using, I think actually this is 1 million gallons a year, that should be 1 million gallons a day. We used our annual reporting information from our water suppliers to basically understand how much water is actively pulled out of the ground for human use, be it agriculture or just potable water supply, self-supply. So it's a very small number compared to the overall volume of water that flows through the state. And then the $64,000 question of how much water do we need? Well, that was we held that one to last, okay? So this is how we decided to help describe it to our board and then the public members that started coming to these meetings. What you see here is we actually broke out the state into 4 different regions. Okay, so we have the northern region up top here, and these outlines here are the water franchise areas of water suppliers in that part of the state. They're fundamentally all surface water systems, with the exception of Pasco and Harrisville. Fundamentally, they get all their water from surface water systems. So that's a little bit easier in order to try to assess those types of systems. It's an engineering calculation through reservoir routing. You can understand what the safe yield of those systems are. There is a difference between, obviously, different types of systems in terms of their protective land and the raw water quality. But generally, it was simple for us to aggregate that northern region to look at it as a single planning unit. The Quinnipiac region down here, again, these are all surface water systems, but they're fundamentally different because they're on an island. The inflow into those reservoirs is not as significant as it is in these areas where you have inflow from out of state, substantially larger watersheds, a lot more protected land. This is a highly impacted environment here. It's pretty well built up. And then, again, the southern region, we identified this as predominantly groundwater, and you can see how all these systems kind of hug the coastline. This is where all the villages and the built-up areas of Suffolk County are, with the exception of Richmond. They're a little bit out there on their own. And finally, the island regions, they are small amounts of water that are being used and produced out in these areas. So we kind of held them as a separate region for analysis. So the results of our analysis, which included a sustainability element as far as how much water you could safely pull out of the ground, given DEM's, they call it their stream flow depletion methodology, that resulted in some interesting statistics. So we'll do the easy ones first. The Quidnick region, generally we've got our average demand and our peak demand. Again, these are build-out numbers. So what you see here in the build-out condition, if you built out all the land that's currently available for development, in the average condition, they have 4 MGD available, surplus water, and even in the peak condition, summertime, tourism in Newport, they actually still can manage their own. So that was an interesting conclusion that we drew here. Again, although we understand that there are different systems out there, so they have some different challenges ahead of them. The island regions, similar. They're very small withdrawals. They do have some nuances, but generally speaking, they know they're on an island. They live like they're on an island, and they can manage their own. The northern part was interesting as well because even though there's plenty of water and build-out in the average condition, we're showing a little bit of a deficiency in the summertime, but it's just a means for us to communicate the issue that there is storage in all of those reservoirs. There really isn't a true deficiency. What happens in the summertime is they start dipping into the storage of the reservoir. Those reservoirs are substantially large enough to manage this, but we wanted to plant the seed in the board's head and the public that you shouldn't start overusing these reservoirs and trying to use them as solutions in other part of the state. They're pretty much designed to handle what's up in that part of the state, and that's a good thing. What really jumped out at us was in the southern region, we were showing significant deficiencies given, again, the sustainable element of water withdrawals and the impacts on rivers and streams. We were showing that in build-out, on an average day, you're substantially overdrawn, and in the summertime, almost by a factor of 3, you're overdrawn. It is a substantial factor as far as planning, and this was something that we developed for the board as a backdrop. Not that they needed to live by these numbers, but they needed to understand where we should put our priorities, how we should look at water resources throughout the state as we try to evolve some solutions. And to emphasize this, to make it very, very simple, just graphically, we put these red dots on the state to talk about some hot points, and our folks in Pawtucket here will might talk about up in Pawtucket. There's a section of a waterway called Abbott Run. It's used functionally for water supply. They have releases that have water that get down to the plant. We want to make sure DEM understands it and continues to allow that to happen in the future. Otherwise, it becomes a natural stream. It could severely impact their operations. Again, we made a note of the citrate reservoir. It really isn't a big problem there, but we wanted to put it on everybody's radar that we're starting to dip into our safe yield in the build-out condition. But the bigger issues are really in the HAP, which is an acronym for the Hunt, Pawtucket, and Pasquantucket aquifers in North Kingstown. The Chapuxet here in South Kingstown, right in Kingston, where we're sitting today, we've got about 60% of the withdrawals are public supply, 40% of them are agriculture. So there was a lot going on in South County. And down in Westerly, there was another interesting story there that even though they're withdrawing a relatively appropriate amount of water, that means Hopkinton and Richmond really can't build up too much, because if they built up too much and started taking more and more water, there'd be less water in the Wood Pawcatuck that would eventually make its way back down to Westerly, where these active and historic withdrawals are happening. So this is an interesting graphic. We got a lot of discussion, a lot of mileage out of it with our board members and the public. So we moved on to a strategic planning process. This is when I took ownership of the program, decided to kind of step away from the initial effort to try to produce water out of Big River as our top priority. And I opted for this dynamic planning process, dynamic strategic planning process. New Commons has developed this program, and it's simply meant to be innovative, solution-oriented. Hello, engineers, right? That's what we're here for. And it's supposed to spur new ideas. So it was a little bit different from standard planning that happens in the state. We also supplemented that effort with this See, Think, Do process, where we really just had a lot of whiteboard sessions with staff. We know pretty well the infrastructure as it's laid out with the water supplies, how the water supplies functionally operate their systems. We have a good, strong connection to the environment. USGS has maintained our stream gauge and a groundwater network for decades, so we've got great data to rely on. And we had started having some detailed conversations with planners throughout the state to understand what they projected years ago, what they've seen, during the recession, post-recession, what they're projecting for the future as far as growth. So we kind of boiled all that together. We came up with a series of theoretical solutions and conceptual alternates for the board to consider. It was a year-long process, and it was quite a process. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of debate. We shopped this around. Again, we moved the meeting all throughout the state and had a lot of great conversations at the board level, at committee levels, and then between staff, both at the Water Resource Board and then with our sister agencies at Health and at DEM. And at the end of the day, we had a matrix of about 20 initiatives developed where we broke them out in terms of we broke them out in two ways. One of them was by timing the business plan, short range and the long range, but also by region of the state. So we can kind of, look at it in any way that made sense, depending on where you're at. That was a geographical assessment versus how we wanted to stack them up as far as the timing. So I'm just going to quickly rifle through these as far as in the regions of the state. In the southern region, we looked at long-range options. We clearly identified a deficiency in water supply in the future. Now, nobody knows when that build-out scenario, if it will ever happen, or when it will actually happen, but we know that we have to start planning for it. So we looked at several options, and one of them right off the top here is Big River Reservoir, and as Dean Wright was talking about, back in the day when he was doing some grad work, I can remember back in the day when I did my senior project here at URI, never would have guessed it, but it was the Big River Reservoir project. And I'll never forget somebody in the review panel standing up before we did our presentations telling me, in no uncertain terms, that no one would ever build that reservoir ever, because it was just folly, it didn't make sense, it had too many environmental impacts. But that all being said, we put it back up there as an alternative. We didn't marry ourselves to it. From an engineering perspective, it makes sense, but it may not make sense in many other viewpoints as well, environmental concerns and just overall demand projections, if we'll ever need it in the future. But to help soften that discussion, we rounded out some fairly interesting options. Desalination is something that's been talked about. We've had previous studies with McGuire Engineering that's looked at it. Their studies, unfortunately, looked at the desal plants further north, but our analysis in strategic planning and the demand projecting indicated that the demand was actually in the southern part of the state. Some of it was directly to address future demand. Some of it was actually to address the environmental degradation that's happening on an occasional basis. So we've actually switched the paradigm. The need is in the southern part of the state. So our desal options actually show a palette of options where there's a central facility at QDC is one option. We've got another sub-option where you have smaller facilities that kind of dot the coastline. We've had some preliminary conversations with CRMC about that, just to see if it is fairly reasonable. And generally speaking, it's a conceptual estimate. We looked at further groundwater development, and as you saw in some of the earlier slides, I'm actively doing this. I'm looking at buying up new well sites all throughout South County. We've got about $7 million left. It's not easy. The environmental community has done a fantastic job buying up all the all the groundwater producing properties. So I'm trying to find some properties that might bear water for future use, and we're essentially land banking them. We've looked at aggressive conservation as, again, another good practice. Look at how we might ratchet down water consumption in our existing facilities, our existing withdrawals. Unfortunately, we can't get to the point where we will have no environmental impacts through aggressive conservation. I think actually we went down towards 40 or 45 gallons per capita per day as an estimate to see if that would balance out, and unfortunately it didn't. What I didn't show here is that we also looked at wastewater reuse, and fortunately the Horsley Witten group had just finished a study where they looked at wastewater reuse opportunities throughout the state, DM had commissioned that report. And there are some opportunities for wastewater reuse, but as you might guess at, there are significant costs associated with that. You basically use the water, you aggregate it down at the low point. Some of the uses are backup gradient, so you're kind of pumping water all over the place. Limited opportunity for some golf courses, but we nonetheless looked at it. In short range, again, as I mentioned, we're continuing to buy new groundwater sources, and we're continuing to fund interconnections between suppliers. This is just a graphic. It's kind of fuzzy here, but again, this is all on our website. This is the picture, the outline of the Big River management area, and the blue area is the perimeter of the reservoir if it were to be built. But in the past, the original concept was to actually make a connection up to Providence Water at a specific connection point that is capable of handling a high amount of flow as a redundancy to the Situate Reservoir. We're actually showing that as a redundant connection. The primary connection would actually be to bring it down to South County. As I mentioned earlier, we saw the deficiencies in South County driving future decision making. We actually have three different variations of this. One of them brings the primary line down Route 3 so that we can connect into Richmond, down 138, and tie into URI, Kingston Water, and down here in United. The other option goes down Route 2. The other option hugs the Irvis service boundary and brings water in the built-up area along Route 1 and then back into Kingston. Northern region, again, I mentioned that overall the balance, the mass balance of water use and water availability tended to work. But what we did see is on the East Bay that there's been a substantial investment in Pawtucket with new infrastructure, a brand new treatment plant. With the recession, there's been a lot of decline in the consumption of water. There's a statutory requirement for the Water Resources Board to actually help the Bristol County Water Authority build a new system of water supply. They've got existing supplies up in Massachusetts. They're having a heck of a time trying to get permits. They've got an antiquated treatment facility. And the board looked at it. I spent a lot of time out in the field with the water suppliers in Pawtucket, East Providence, and Bristol. We came up with another option. And it's simply to have an interconnection between Pawtucket through East Providence to Bristol County. This is just a quick graphic here. Again, the existing reservoirs that serve Bristol County are up here, and including the Kickamuit, the treatment plant is down here in Warren. But these systems are functionally offline. They don't work very well. They're relatively shallow reservoirs. They don't have good protective radius around each of the reservoirs, and they actually, in some instances, don't have full legal rights to the reservoirs. So the concept would be to simply use the great water quality, right, Chris? Fantastic water quality up in Pawtucket, and use existing infrastructure where possible. Help the city of East Providence out because they've got some concerns about their supplies into Providence, and make some connection down to an existing pump station in East Providence, where Bristol then has existing lines that will bring it back down to their service area over here in the East Bay. And there was another short-range option for the northern region where we simply talked about an existing law that's been on the books for probably about 50 years that obligates the Providence Water Supply Board to supply water to very rural areas of northern Rhode Island, Burrillville, Pasco. It doesn't make sense. It made sense back in the 40s when they were thinking about this, but if Providence Water had to supply those rural areas with potable water at the rate of 150 gallons per capita per day, they wouldn't be able to do it. They wouldn't be able to serve their existing customer base. So we actually have a short-range plan to clean up that legislative language and provide some additional breathing room for the Providence Water Supply Board. Quinnipiac region, again, as I mentioned, they're an island. Not a lot of recharge out there. Yes, they do have capacity in the volume of the reservoirs, but those reservoirs, it is like alchemy. Julia Forge and Newport does a fantastic job running her water system, but it is something to be concerned about. She's also got several reservoirs that are very close to the shore. especially with Hurricane Sandy. It's something that, you know, we need to look at. I'm also on the Climate Change Commission for the state. We've identified this as an area of concern. We want to make sure that those reservoirs are protected, that they look at bathymetrics to ensure that the capacities are maintained into the future. So we were suggesting a vulnerability assessment. In the island region, again, Block Island, as you saw earlier, we've actually set them up with a new source. It's actually a redundant source. Jamestown, again, they're on an island. They understand that. They actually are very miserly with their water resources. It's a great model when you actually don't have resources to be very cautious about future development. But in the short range, we do want to have better connection with their emergency interconnection that they occasionally will employ, where they literally roll out a hose over the Jamestown Bridge and they connect to North Kingstown. As I mentioned earlier, North Kingstown has concerns about their water supply, not just with the groundwater resource as far as being able to produce enough water that doesn't have any long-term environmental impacts, but also hydraulically through their transmission lines. So we need to take another look at that and help Jamestown have a good backup plan if there is a long-term shortage of water. Statewide initiatives, I'm not going to go through all of these, but we had several statewide initiatives, including the land management plan for Big River. Once again, it has a long-term purpose. I don't think there'll be in my lifetime a move to develop a reservoir there, but I need to clean it up. I need to keep it pristine. It is a future water supply for the state of Rhode Island. We administer the Water Supply System Management Plan program. That needs to be updated. Started off, it had an initial purpose, and it's kind of played out a little bit. We still need to help suppliers out with some planning for water supplies, but I think we have an opportunity now to weave in our new strategic plan into an updated Water Supply System Management Plan program. Annual water reporting actually supplements what happens with USGS in our gauge information, so we get a better understanding of how water is being used throughout the state. Demand management strategies we talked about, funding programs. Again, we partner with water suppliers. They actually collect funding on our behalf. We give it back to them through surcharge and funding programs for land acquisition. Education has always been something that's on our plate. A coordinated water supply approval process and drought planning and response. And the last item that I'll leave off with here is our top priority for the entire state, and it's water availability estimating. It's very easy to say. Nobody really knows how to do it. We've been working very hard at this, and it's a mix of hard numbers of groundwater withdrawals through annual use reporting, the gauge information we get from USGS, and we simply take all this information and understanding how communities make decisions for future uses of water. It's all within their legal boundaries. Of course, basins, watersheds do not pay attention to legal boundaries, nor does precipitation. It happens when it happens. So our charge is simply to take all of that statistical information, which is incredibly variable. And we've got great information from USGS that goes back in some instances over 60 years, and then try to figure out how to communicate how much water is available to individual communities so that the future water demand is in check with a sustainable level of development. This is not a one and done type of program. We see this as we will lead the edge in the policy development, the development of management tools, and there'll likely be an acknowledgement of that information through the municipalities, and they'll have to go back and forth as far as what they would like to do in their future build-out scenarios. A great example is what the town of North Kingstown is actually doing right now. They've actually reduced their water service area on their own. Nobody forced them to do it, but they did it so that they could make sure that their development potential in the Post Road corridor takes precedence over, for example, just subdivisions, just residential use. So I just wanted to leave you with this last thought. This is another graphic of the state and the major water suppliers, and you can see their franchise areas. And then I'll also show you the urban services boundary. This is something through the Division of Planning. This urban services boundary essentially sets the template for future development in the state of Rhode Island. It's fundamentally driven by where the water supply is. Okay, we go back there. So again, what we're doing is we're correlating statistical information for precipitation for historical uses of water through not only just water supplies but agriculture. The self-supply uses are a smaller fraction of that, and they were correlating it to individual communities. We're literally trying to figure out with GIS how to chunk up all this information and then be able to present out to individual municipalities good guidance as to how they can continue to provide for development with the given resources in the backdrop of a multitude of potential long-term solutions for water supply. That is pretty much it.
Okay, we can take some questions.
Sir.
Ken, in Bristol County, we've been doing a lot on water conservation and probably gone too far because it's down to about 40 gallons per capita per day. But the infrastructure costs, which makes up about 90% of the fees, stay the same. So that the price per gallon is actually increasing when people think they're conserving. How do you combat that?
Yeah, well, it's a good point. The water suppliers knew this intimately when we developed the Water Use and Efficiency Act, and they were very guarded in that particular point. Our threshold for water conservation is actually at 65 gallons per capita per day, because we knew that it's counterintuitive. The more you conserve water, the higher the costs are per gallon, simply because there's so many fixed costs that are part of individual water supply systems. The best message that you can take out of this is that for future expenses, for future capital investments, you're theoretically deferring a lot of new infrastructure costs as it pertains to additional demand. It sometimes doesn't always play out perfectly for folks potentially like Bristol, where you're substantially a wholesale customer. I mean, their water plant recently has officially gone offline. So you're really at the discretion of your wholesale suppliers. But again, the best message is that with increased usage, there is an accelerated requirement for capital. If you reduce your usage over time, there may be opportunities to defer costs for capital investment. So it's not the immediate savings that you might want, but it's about the only good news that comes out of high and aggressive conservation of water. I mean, at the back of the envelope, the altruistic view here is that if you conserve water for residential purposes, you may make water available for economic opportunities. Rhode Island's water supply systems were fundamentally built to help support the industrial base that used to be here. So we're struggling with that right now. It is a big issue, and Pawtucket, the folks at Pawtucket will talk about that shortly. So this is a real issue, and a lot of people think that water is undervalued, and from an environmental perspective, they think it's okay that you have some increase in cost, but I'm with you that it potentially shouldn't be done to artificially increase rates. That doesn't make sense.
Other questions?
I remember there was the flooding on various rivers about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, and I was wondering if are those similar regions where the big river reservoir would be, and if so, do you think there'll be impacts on having the reservoir versus not on events like that?
Yeah, I mean, the flooding happened in all parts of the state and the region, so it wasn't unique to Big River for sure. Your point about reservoirs and how they influence or impact downstream impacts, that's an active, it's a dynamic management tool that isn't, I don't think it isn't reached full maturity in Rhode Island. We were talking earlier about Providence Water Supply Board and their opportunity to control their reservoir level in anticipation of storm events. So I know that with the previous EMA director, Dave Smith, that he was very active in discussions with Providence Water to talk about how reservoirs may be invoked as a release, mechanism, controlled release mechanisms, and that it could happen. But the back side of that, or opposite that, there's also environmental impacts associated with radically fluctuating stream flow, and there's also increased risk if you do significant releases and you don't get as big of a downpour as you thought, then you're a little bit more at risk. So there are trade-offs there.
Can you tell us what the bond issue that we just passed has to do with your planning?
Sure. Well, it's in support of our planning. It is also directly applicable to the Department of Health's program for clean water. So we don't have direct control over that program, but we do support it as we wrote letters of support. Essentially, it's the state match to help support additional leverage funding through EPA that gets put out through the Rhode Island Clean Water Finance Agency. So that's basic infrastructure, limited as far as expansions of their systems, but there's a very specific series of criteria that certain projects can get funded under.
I do. Do you see a future for indirect potable reuse anywhere around? I mean, our wastewater treatment plants have undergone really rigorous upgrades over the last several years. I mean, Warwick, we're looking at another upgrade for phosphorus removal and some nitrogen compounds. And the amount of money that we're investing in those upgrades is providing for, an effluent that's of superior quality. So
Right.
I'm wondering if there would be any, conceptual idea for the future for that.
Sure, there absolutely is, and again, those concepts were discussed in the Horsley-Witten report that DEM had commissioned. It's actually part of our strategic plan. You can pull it offline and take a look at it. However, as you may know, actually the water suppliers know this, with the Department of Health, they're very, very tough regarding their potable water standards. So Rhode Island is not there yet. Okay, if you're in Florida, you're in Arizona, you're in different parts of the country where they have very different climates, very different water resource issues. They have a more advanced mechanism to actually have those types of options readily available. In Rhode Island, what was analyzed as reasonable opportunities are really reuse on golf courses, and they're few and far between. They're kind of in the Warwick area, a few of them in East Greenwich, but beyond that, there weren't significant opportunities. And the good and the bad thing is that we get just enough rain in Rhode Island to make it ineffective as far as the financial cost, generally speaking. And that's the bane of our existence for strategic planning. We get lulled into that, nice easy, flow of water. It's happening, it's there, but the groundwater systems, as soon as they're starved off with a drought, they really don't have any backup. So the wastewater reuse would be a great opportunity to kind of weave in, perhaps through aquifer recharge and other mechanisms. But it's all spelled out in that Horsley-Witten.
Or even like savings on, like, say, an industrial, commercial user base.
Yeah, Quonset is a great opportunity, and again, that's a holistic look at economic development, an area that's been defined as having a deficiency of water resources. So if there was an opportunity to look at how to engage industry that they might be able to use that type of high-quality effluent, it takes a lot of work to get there, but
Engineering.
yeah, there you go.
Yes.
So the Big River was originally, management area was originally pitched as being a reservoir, a surface water body, but it also, as it currently stands, potentially a groundwater reservoir. If I understood you correctly, none of the water suppliers want to tap into it right now, despite some concerns in South County due to pricing. Is that correct? And then I guess my question would be, looking forward, what's the perspective on that as far as getting prices for that? How would prices become such that they'd be interested in it, I guess?
Yeah, we've actually got other alternatives where, in the short term, we've actually suggested there are connections between Kent County Water Authority and both North Kingstown and Quonset Development, where we could actually feed water that's supplied by Providence down to these areas that are infrequently starved with water as it pertains to protecting the environment. We think that's a short-range solution, but there needs to be a long-range solution put on the table, depending on how we see this cycle of the municipality starting to engage and understand the limitations of water. There will be plenty of water made available through desal, through Big River, through conservation, through any mechanisms. So we see ourselves in a position of saying, we're not telling you no, that there's no water, but we are basically going down a path where we're saying there is going to be an environmental restriction where you're going to have to make changes. And you can clearly now see what the cost differences are, so that the towns can start thinking about that well in advance and prepare for it, hopefully gradually over time.
Further questions? Let's thank our speaker. I see the cookies are outside. Let's take a quick 10-minute break, be back here at 2, and we'll continue the program.